Paulina.
Hey, Megan.
What book are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about Superior, the Return of Race Science.
Well, that's a pretty heavy title, so we should probably give some content warnings ahead of time that
Definitely.
this particular discussion will involve race, multi-generational trauma, uh, potentially gross science, and genetics. Um, Paulina, could you give us a brief summary of the book?
Yeah, so I view this book as a sort of modern historical and sort of current accounting of the enduring presence of race science, and specifically, it makes a lot of ties between what archaeology has to do about it, or has to do with it. Is there anything that you would add to that description?
I think that's pretty good. I would say that this book takes a very unflinching look at the way that race science and eugenics and uh, twin studies takes a really unflinching look at the ways that those have been used indirectly and directly to cause harm.
It's interesting. I feel like whenever I talk race science, my brain assumes that there will be harm, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, so
yeah.
yeah. Oh, pause.
But we should mention that there are studies mentioned in the book where scientists don't think they're doing harm, and where sometimes they're actively trying to undo harms, and sometimes they're successful at that, and sometimes they're not. Um, and that was a tough section of the book for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And Superior, The Return of Race Science is written by Angela Saini, who is a South Asian descent British author. So, was there anything specific about the book that stood out to you, like an interesting sort of factoid or something along
this
those lines?
this was one of the few books when I was reading through it that I found myself. I read digitally. Immediately going to the highlight feature on a whole bunch of quotes, like things that
Mm-hmm.
I, beyond our review of this, that I know that I want to incorporate into work that I do in the future, looking at ethics and archaeology. Um, I found it very interesting in this, the way that the book starts with archaeology. It starts in the British Museum,
Mm-hmm.
and then you feel like you go away from it for a bit, and you're like, "Ooh, okay, archaeology. We're gonna be okay." Oh no, we're not okay. Um,
Uh,
yeah, that.
yeah, there are so many little parts like that too, where it feels like okay, it's going to be very focused, and it's like oh no, we're going to come back to things in our field. Um, but yeah, was there? I guess were there specific stories in the book that stood out like as a great example of that? Well, I guess you mentioned the
Yeah, I
beginning
want to pull up some of the quotes that I kept.
of. Mm-hmm.
Because
Wonderful.
let's see if I can get them.
I guess while you do that,
Yeah.
one of the things that really stood out to me and that I actually really liked about the book is that oftentimes, particularly when you're living in a Western society or in a place that has to or should be paying for the sins of colonialism, we talk about race science as if it stops in those societies. And one thing I really enjoyed about Sayini's work is that she doesn't stop there. She actually talks about how race science exists in a lot of different places and that legacy is a cross cultural legacy that we also need to address in a lot of different spots. And I thought that was something that I was less familiar with going into this book, but is also something that, like, as folks, as archaeologists who are interested in working abroad, we need to be aware of what the local sort of race science issues are and make sure that we're also working to engage with those narratives in a way that dispels those racist assumptions, because different places have different relationships with the concept of race.
Yeah, there were a couple points in the book where one where she was talking about medical research, and how it's not as easy to do genetic studies and medical research, and particularly blood typing studies in marginalized populations as it used to be because of pan-indigenous unity. And I was
Mm-hmm,
like, that's fantastic.
mm-hmm,
That's great that we are getting towards a point where people are able to say, no, like, no, we have bodily autonomy, we have cultural autonomy.
mm-hmm,
Because I remember so many stories out of cultural anthropology, when I was first starting out, that if you recounted them, you'd be like, those no, those people were not, they were not given informed consent. They were
mm-hmm,
not given a choice in any of this.
mm-hmm.
It, it's good to see. Um, it's good to see in some way that the power of the internet and the more interconnected world is actually benefiting,
Yeah.
because a lot of the book actually talks about the fact that that race science was tied very much into what is now the modern alt right, and the way that that
Mm-hmm,
rose up through initial email lists and bulletin boards,
mm-hmm,
and how easy it was for scientists to get roped into that without
mm-hmm.
realizing at first that that's what they were doing. So it's good to see the internet being used for good instead of
Yeah. Yeah, as well. Both manipulated by the bad folks, but also used by good people to stay informed and be active and advocate for their rights.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me pull up one of these quotes that I found that. Um, so, in hindsight, part of the problem was that the scientists, however well intentioned they were, failed to connect what they were doing with people's real life experiences with race, with the history and politics of this deadly idea. They thought they were above it all, when in fact they were always central to it. That one that got me right there, as as someone who wants to be the good white ally. Um, that I think that quote right there is something that in archaeology we need to be paying more attention to, um, because I think we're not considering the real life experiences of the communities that we go into when we're excavating. Um,
Yeah.
so, uh, did you have any part of this book that you really liked or that you want to share?
There were lots of parts of this book that both made me go, ugh, but also like really excited. And one of the things that, like, she didn't necessarily directly address it in this book, but for me, I made this mental jump between sort of two different race science stories, archaeology specific, that come out of this book. And the first was the racist backlash that came out when Cheddar Man from your the country where you live in, the
Yeah,
Cheddar Man
that one
backlash,
here.
where he has dark skin.
Yeah.
But then combining that racist backlash, this attack on British identity, with the Solutrean hypothesis. Because the Solutrean hypothesis is often used by racists, or by people who don't understand the full thing, to talk about how, like, Europeans early, super thousands of years ago, colonized North America. But if you realize that Cheddar Man and the Solutrean hypothesis are much closer in time than the concept of white Britons, I was just thinking about, like, okay, so you're advocating for dark skinned people to have actually populated North America from Europe. And it was just really interesting because she talks about these two things separately, because they have very specific narratives and very specific racist assumptions that go into each of them, and different ways to sort of, like, talk about how to dispel the false assumptions that go into the narratives around, like, the Solutrean is not the Solutrean hypothesis is primarily, has very little evidence to support it, and Cheddar Man has a lot of evidence to support that yes, in fact, he was dark skinned. But if you combine those two together, then actually what these racists are advocating for is Europeans of dark skin populating North America. And I just thought that was such a funny, like,
Yeah,
combined thing there that, like, oh, okay, it's still brown people coming to North America then, right? Like, that's actually the
yeah.
case.
They just
And
want
so I
a
just thought that
different
was such
set.
a, pardon?
They just want a different, like, is it just a different set of brown people? Like, how,
I don't know.
hey, racist, how do you react to that?
Yeah, and so I just thought that was such a funny thing to like realize and like put
Mhm.
together between those stories
Yeah,
is like, okay, still like even if you're gonna argue for that, still not gonna be light skinned people. It's still gonna be, you know, like people with darker skin tones. And I just thought that was such a um like funny little thing. Like obviously the same people who are gonna argue for the like the people who are gonna argue for the solution hypothesis from a non-scientific
mhm.
grounding are probably also not going to be the ones who believe that Cheddar Man was dark skinned.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just thought that was such a funny point of cross section there, or that at least the scientists who might come at it from a scientific perspective and quote unquote believe science should then be arguing for and be depicting a solution hypothesis of darker skinned people who are coming into North America still. So there's that interesting sort of dichotomy there. But I was going to ask you, how do you feel? But people may have already picked up on this. But how do you feel that this book fits our theme that we've organized it into, which is what is the impact of archaeological data on modern human society?
Ooh, yeah. There was a quote in the book that talked about immigration, and it was specifically dealing with immigration in the United States and immigration in Britain in the early 1900s, and
Mm-hmm.
what that meant, and the way that this race science was used to basically to isolate and keep uh, non-whites from immigrating, and the way that that ended up being like codified into Australian law and their immigration policy. And I was reading the language that they used at the time, and honest to God, you could have put it in the mouth of Suella Braverman, a British politician currently who is very anti-immigrant, and specifically anti-non-white immigrant. It and the same data. It's the same data being used in both
Mm-hmm.
times. We've switched some of the wording around on it, but it's the same thing. And that really resonated with me because I arrived in the UK in 2016, so I got here just before Brexit, just before Cheddar Man, and watched all of this, the way that all the dog whistles to race and all the very overt language to race came up in these two issues when I first arrived, and how I actually had people, archaeologists in this country, tell me that I shouldn't be worried about this immigration stuff because I was the right kind of immigrant. And I would like to take this book and give it to all of those people. Like, please end your racism.
Yeah.
Not from an expert. Um, yeah. So this book, I know I'm going to be sending copies to people.
Yeah,
Did
it's
you have any like additional materials or extensions that you might want to recommend to people if they
there
were
is a
bothered or intrigued by this book?
um I don't have any nonfiction recommendations, as that tends to be my modus. But a couple of things that I would recommend. There's a really great song by a Philippine diaspora band in Canada called Panteo. The song is called it's just VVV, like V, capital V space capital V space capital V, and then in parentheses they lie. And I think
Oh,
it's just yeah, that's just the name of the song. And I just feel like that's such a great reminder for these people who, the mental hoops that Sayini describes, so many fantastic mental gymnastics that modern scientists who draw from archaeological data have to go through to make this work. And at the heart of it, some of it can sound very convincing, it sounds very logical, it feels like it follows, but you have to have that reminder at the back of your head that they lie. Like they use facts to lie. And I think that's such an important thing. If you're interested in sort of fictionalized but heavy discussions of race, I really recommend Octavia Butler's. It's occasionally called the Lilith's Brood series now. I believe the first book is Xenogenesis. It's about World War III, primarily killing all humans except for some amounts, and we are quote unquote saved by an alien race. And but how that, what that saving looks like is very complex and very complicated, and deals with it also from a sort of a biological physical standpoint, but also sort of a ethical standpoint. And particularly if you read through the whole series, you see how some problems in human society still then impact or influence the outcomes for humanity. And that's a really important aspect of those books. I would also recommend, and you'll hear probably a little bit more about this book later on, A Master of Jinn by P. Jelly Clark. Um, and that just has a really great exam. It's a fictionalized exploration of the period in which this race science starts to develop, and I think it's such a great book for exploring different conceptions of race science. Like if we didn't do what we did, we being archaeologists, do what happened in the 19th century, where would we actually be now? And I think it's such a cool exploration of that, and just a really great exploration of the relationship between colonizers and the peoples who they took from. And it's just a really great book. Megan, are there any works that you would recommend to go along with this work?
yeah. I actually have a nonfiction piece, Postcards from the Brain Museum, The Improbable
Oh.
Search for Meaning in the Matter of Famous Minds by Brian Burrell.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a book that looks at phrenology and looks at uh, surgical brain, posthumous brain removal,
Mm-hmm.
bad science, and the way that that this was used to prop up ideas about white superiority by specifically using brains of well-known thinkers and authors who happen to be white. Um, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a little gory in places because does have to deal with removing the brain. It also talks about what happens to these brains, like
Mm-hmm.
where are
Yeah.
they? I think that was one thing um, in uh, the book we're talking about today that really jumped out at me was um, there was a section talking about what did they call her,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I
I
mean,
think I'm
the I just forgot the
remembering.
name, the Hottentot Venus.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I read it and I was like, this is horrifying. And then I read how recently her body was still on display. Um, and bad
I
juju.
think, yeah. I think that is the desecration of her body
Yeah.
was so horrifying to read,
Mhm.
um, and it's a great reminder that these legacies have not gone away.
No.
And I think that's such an important narrative in the book, is that these ideas started a hundred plus years ago, but they very much, as you mentioned with your I'm going to call them a local politician for you, um, uh, um, that it's exact same rhetoric. These actually haven't changed, and so studying the historical origins of this are very important to remain informed, ethically informed,
Yeah.
and to remember that like this is stuff that's happened within people who will be reading this is lifetime. Like a
Within
lot of that
my
stuff in
within
your
my
experience.
archaeological education,
Hmm.
there was a bit of a kerfuffle when I first started because there was a professor in my department who denied that the Aztecs, Mayas, or Olmecs had made their own culture and said that they were all imports from China, that it was the Chinese who had come and done it all. And that person was on in the department longer than they should have been.
It's and once again that these legacies are not gone. They are
Yeah,
still very very vibrant, and important recognition that archaeology is relevant. And that's not really a discussion that we should have. It's about how do we um, make it explore the problems of the now in ways that create solutions rather than just more discussion. So, I guess beyond that book, were there any other things that you would recommend for
that
interested
I think you
consumers?
covered the fiction and musical things, and I'm definitely going to be listening to that song immediately after we finish recording.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share today?
No, I think that just I encourage folks to pick up Superior, because it's a really enjoyable work, in all the worst ways, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's going to make you feel real bad about things, but in the best way possible.
yeah. Well, anyways, thank you so much for talking about this book today, Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Paulina.